All right. So, hey, welcome back to another episode of the Finding Fynergy podcast. I have a special guest on the show today. I have Alexis Skopos. Alexis is here to just share her story. I'm super excited to hear it. And I want to give her the floor to introduce herself and tell us a little bit about herself, who she is, what she does. And then we'll get started with our interview.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. My name is Alexis Skopos. I'm a licensed mental health counselor here in the state of Florida. I specialize in trauma. I actually just finished phase two training of something called brain spotting. Um, Currently, I co own a private practice with one of my really good friends. We have physical offices in DeLand and Daytona in Florida, but we do telecounseling all across the state. Um, we really have this push lately to get into community events. We're doing a bunch of events with Mothers Against Drunk Driving, the Suicide Prevention Foundation, as well as actually there's another nonprofit called Aces Matter, which we are guest speaking at in the next following month for their domestic violence um, events. So that's kind of the professional nutshell of myself. But I am a dog mama. They are the lights of my life. I do a lot of resin art. I definitely try to do a lot of self care things because I work a lot and just, kind of living a low key life right now while I engage with clients on the day to day.
All right. Thank you for that introduction. I'm sure we're gonna definitely hear more about your practice and you as a therapist a little later on in the episode. But like Alexa said, she's a mental health professional, and so am I. So like I'm super excited to have her on. But one thing that I find, from mental health professionals is that generally it's that passion is born from somewhere, right? And so Alexis and I were talking a little bit, before the show, and she has a story to tell. And so I don't know where you want to start, Alexis, with kind of what motivated you to get into, mental health in the first place.
Yeah, I guess, I will start from the top. So when I was really, really young, I had a beautiful, beautiful family system. When I was about 7, we found out my mom was sick. They had no idea what it was. Turns out it was something called scleroderma. And essentially her organs just kind of froze and froze and froze until they like broke open. And I know that's kind of graphic and I apologize, but it's essentially what happens. She was diagnosed with that when I was 7. And at the time, it was incredibly rare. There were no medications or anything. And unfortunately, she did end up passing when I was 9. Um, but those that 2-year time span was very, very interesting, kind of set up the tone for the rest of my life. There's a lot of fear because I would see her get sick and things. And that was my person. Like my mom and I were so, so, so close. But then my dad, he loved my mom more than anything. They were together since middle school. They were each other's people. And I always say, when she died, so did he. But those 2 years where she was sick, there wasn't medication they have today for scleroderma. And essentially, he was working 20 hours a day, it seemed like, because he had to pay the extra $10,000 a month for her medication. So didn't really know my dad in those kind of formative years. And then, my mom passed. And it's funny, but it's not funny. I always remember the first thing my dad asking me after everybody kind of cleared out. It was, "So what do you eat for dinner?" Because he had no idea. We didn't have that kind of relationship. I saw him on the weekends, and now we were kind of thrust into this world together. And he also has a lot of trauma. His family, it's a lot of generational trauma. We'll just say that. So we were just kind of hanging by our seats, trying to figure out how the hell to make this life work together. Um, about 6 months after my mom died, and what I will say is my dad has definitely an issue with being alone, and I think it does have to do with just kind of that whole scenario. But he was always bisexual, but he started dating strictly men because he just always said he could never love anybody else the way he loved my mom. And I think everybody who knows him could see that. But his first partner, unfortunately, ended up being quite abusive. He was an alcoholic. When I was 10, my dad decided that we were going to move to Florida because at the time we were in Ohio, which, you know, growing up in rural Ohio with a father who's also seeing men at the time, kids were mean. Um, once moving to Florida, though, it was a lot more open mindedness, which was incredible. But that time period was really rough. And I was with his abusive ex, and he was very neglectful. I remember being 10, 11 years old, and I'm sleeping under my father's office desk because I was so scared because he didn't come home from the bar for a day or two. And it was just little things like that. And eventually I did move in with my grandparents for a short amount of time, and that was safety. So my grandparents have always been a very integral part of my story. But once I was 12, I did move to Florida. Um, the angsty teen years definitely hit hard. It's a lot of anger of taking me away from, my mom's mom and her family and just starting over. But in hindsight, I get it. But at the time, I did not, and I was very alone. I was very suicidal. Um, I was very self harming. I did a lot of self harming. When I was 13, though, I ultimately did try to overdose. It did not work out, which I mean, obviously, thank gosh now, but at the time, I was like, damn, so you guys really got me on this one. So I went through a really dark time, and then about probably a few months later, decided, all right, we're either going to do this or we're going to do something else. So at that time, I don't know what I was planning, but I had a knife and I was kind of messing around with it. And my dad's door opened at like midnight, which was very strange. That was not usual for him. So I kind of took that as a sign of, and I don't know, maybe it was me looking for a sign, but that something in this night is telling me to just hold on. And I know it sounds kind of cheesy and cliche, but it was that moment I decided I'm going to help no other teenage girl or person feel the way that I have felt. And I don't know if you'll agree with this or if anybody will, but I think once suicide becomes an option, it's always kind of lingering in the back of your head because you've been to that dark place before, so it's so easy at times to just be like, well, I already kind of emotionally prepared for this, so let's get back on that bandwagon. So that's been a really, really constant theme in my life, unfortunately. But that was the turning point. I was 13 or 14, I believe. Then kind of fast forwarding again, very angsty, but we try to make it work. When I was 16, though, I started a job, and there's a lot of guilt on this. I will preface. I was, just a 16-year-old girl, and he was a 23, 24-year-old coworker. And that is how I unfortunately lost my virginity. It started consensual and did not end consensual. And there's a lot of guilt on that because, of course, it's hard enough to, I think, for people to say, like I was raped, but then to also kind of have the caveat of it started consensual and didn't end consensual. There were definitely comments from people that I told, like, well, you deserve that. You let him on. You did this, you did that. And that really was a mind fuck for a long time. Like, you're right. I did, but did I? Was my crying not enough? Was my saying stop not enough? But so that kind of became warped. And the reason there's a lot of guilt on that today is he was in prison for a few years for doing the same thing to somebody who was 12, I believe. And it's just, this will become a common theme you'll see as I talk more. But so that was really traumatic. And then he told everybody at work that I was just this huge slut and this whore who wanted it. And I basically had to end up quitting because it just got too much. And he was trying, I think because of he knew the age was not good, he was trying to tell everybody at work that I did it, essentially. So I quit that job and I just kind of try to be low key for a little bit of time. I got into a master's program in 20, oh my gosh, 2015, I believe. Yes. Life was lifing till then, usual. But when that started, I found myself in a really, really, really abusive relationship about a year and a half into it. And that, out of everything, though, I think has been the most kind of changing event other than my mom's death. I was in this relationship for a year, and it's just crazy the amount of impact that 1 year has had across my whole life, even till this day. We talk about getting out of those relationships, but we don't talk about the after effects, the trauma responses you learn, the survival tactics that you have to unlearn because they're not going to work into your new relationships, and just the mistrust. And that's something more recently I've definitely been dealing with. I was 23 when I was in that relationship and he was 32. Now I'm 30. So I mean it was some time ago, but he's actually in jail right now because he's had two domestic battery felonies against him since. And again, that guilt pops back in of, wow, this other person who was an abuser to me, had I gone to the police, maybe this wouldn't be happening to somebody else. But I know that's not true and that's not how it works logically. And especially as a therapist, I know that's not how that works, but that emotional side, it's still just is devastated. And I'm very nosy, especially because I had to do a lot of life changing. Like I was nervous about changing my address, about what I put on the internet, all of these things that could track back to me because he threatened to kill me so many times, and who knows? And then of course, I see the charges for his most previous partners, and it just tells me that he'd gotten worse. But again, that guilt. Well, if you had gone to the police, which to a degree I did, but they basically tell you until they kind of beat the crap out of you, they're not going to do anything. So that's a whole other conversation. But yeah, so there's a lot of guilt that's still very much open wound because this is something currently that's going on, and it's kind of hard sometimes, being in the field alone and then also dealing with a kind of active domestic violence case. It's not mine, of course, but it is in a way. It's still my story and just somebody else's experience now, which really sucks. But after I got out of that relationship, I found myself in a relationship with the first person who showed me love, which was a whole other dangerous issue. Um, he wasn't a bad person. He just didn't know how to be a good partner. We were together for 5 years and we got married, and we were married for 5 months, and then we got divorced because he decided it's not what he wanted. And that's one of those things, I think, though, gratefully it did work out the way it did. But also, it's just kind of that added layer of, I don't want to say trauma, but just really, really, really negative experiences that created this path. But, kind of fast forwarding to today, I definitely had done a lot of work, a lot of therapy, a lot of changing, just trying to figure out what I want, who I am, and what I will and won't accept. But it's been a hell of a journey.
Man, it sounds like it. It really sounds like it. And you gave us so much there. I was taking notes while you were talking. So I wanna go back because you really kind of took us through like your entire journey. So number one, I appreciate that. I appreciate the transparency. Um, I want to like touch on some of these, because like you said, it all started, when your mom was diagnosed with scleroderma. Is that how you say it?
Scleroderma. It's such a weird name.
Scleroderma. Okay, I've never heard of this. Um, and basically, you said it's when your organs are freezing up.
Yeah, so there's an internal and external version. She had the internal version. So like external, it's often where people, that they can't like close their hands all the way because their organs are just kind of I can't think of a better word, but kind of like frozen. It makes your skin very hard.
Oh, okay.
But in her scenario, she had the internal version, which means like basically like her lungs, they would harden and harden and harden just
Wow.
to a point to where they just like cracked.
Wow. Wow. So, do you remember the feeling? Like, because she was diagnosed at 7 and she ended up, transitioning at age 9. And like you said, that was, a 2 year or nearly 2 year gap. What was that like for you? Do you remember that? Like,
Yeah, that whole time period, it's kind of crazy because like I said, my mom and I were incredibly close, and I always remember she was very sentimental. She'd tell me, I love you so much, even more than I love your daddy. So she was really that first person that made me feel what love is. And I hate to say it, but other than my grandma, she's really been the only person that could make me feel that kind of love. So I remember that, but I think here comes my issue is growing up, there's a point in your life where you see your parents turn human. You see they have flaws. But in my scenario with my mom, she never had that opportunity. She was always this angel and always this kind of untouchable. And then, she passed, and she still kind of has that lore in my head, which is beautiful, but also really hard to cope with at times. Because I'm always known as, Chris's daughter because she was so big in our community and things. And that's beautiful. I love that legacy. But also it takes away that humanity side of it. But no, my mom was an incredible, incredible, incredible person. And I think the part that really sucks is, they told us 10 years because they didn't know what the hell was going on, but they said at least 10 years. When they said that, it ended up being like 6 months after. Um, and the really crappy part is because I've just kind of started revisiting her in my healing journey because it's the biggest and the hardest. But she passed away September 16th of 2003. She was supposed to be coming home either the 17th or the 18th because she was doing better. And it's just kind of like, how do you go from, oh, you're doing better, to the call at 3 o'clock in the morning? And I just started talking to my dad about this again because we haven't talked about it in 20 actually 21 years. It was 21 years last week. First time we talked about it together because it's so hard for both of us. And he's like, yeah, they said she was doing so much better. So when I got that call at 3 a.m., I let it go to voicemail because never would have thought. And then I woke up and I called them and I got the news, and it was just disbelief.
yeah. No, that's quite a journey. You know, death is one of those challenging things. Like, it can happen one of two ways. It can be sudden, or you can know. And
Yeah.
either way, it's not easy. There's no easy way, and so to have that time period and you're kind of like, what's going to happen? When is it going to happen? And then have this arbitrary 10 years, that the doctor said. And then it's like, boom, you know,
Yeah.
oh, yeah, that's a lot to go through at age, 7 and 9. Like,
Yeah, and I mean, my heart breaks for my grandmother more than anybody, because she lost a daughter, which you should never experience. But then the added bonus of that was my aunt, which was my mom's sister. She was in a car wreck, in, I want to say it was October or November. It was right after though. And I mean, she was paralyzed. She was in ICU for like 100 days. We had to reteach her how to walk and do all of the things. So she's kind of like a boom, boom, boom. And it was just, I don't know. I remember being the caregiver, and I remember everybody saying, you're going to be a nurse one day. I ended up being a therapist because there's no way in hell it's going to be a nurse. Bless their hearts. They work hard.
Yes, they do. They do. It takes a special person. It's funny because that's what people tell us about us. I don't know how you do this, but and I'm like, I don't know how this other people do their professions. I'm fine over here. But um, wow, yeah, that's a lot. Just and of course the story didn't stop there, right? Um, like you said, after your mom transitioned, you feel like that, severely affected your dad, which, kind of caused him to explore, right? And, his exploration, had an impact on you, which typically, when parents go through things, it impacts their children, but you were able to make that, connection, and probably were able to see it, at the age of 9 and 10, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, his boyfriend at the time moved in with us, and like he never came out. He actually didn't come out till I was like 16 to me. But
Wow.
it was for people who had eyeballs, it was pretty obvious.
Right.
But I was in denial with my mom, and which again, like I love my dad so much, and I'm so proud of him for being on his journey and finding things out. But when you grow up in rural Ohio, that was not a thing. So, I remember one time specifically, it was a family friend, and she made a comment like, well, at least my dad's not gay. And I don't know, I don't remember what
Wow.
I said to her back, but it was not nice because she left that room crying. And I remember her sister looking at me and going, she deserved that. I don't feel that anymore.
Absolutely. I think anybody listening or watching would be siding with you too. Kids are cruel. God,
Kids are really cruel. They are.
cruel. So yeah, I think it's a big part of that in dealing with that transition and is you growing up in rural Ohio. I think anyone growing up in a rural area, yeah, you face way more closed mindedness,
Oh, yeah.
right? And like you said that you were near an Amish community. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, that's a whole nother level of conservatism, you know?
Yeah, and I mean, it was one of those towns too that we grew up in where, everybody knew everybody. You went to school. Everybody I know that still lives there, they're married to each other. Like it was one of those really close knit small communities. And nowadays, of course, being part of the LGBTQIA community is much more accepted, but it took 20 years to get there. So I also think, gosh, that my dad moved us to Florida for that reason. But it's just interesting to see kind of the real life changes of that acceptance and things.
Absolutely. Yeah, that is interesting. I totally didn't think about that perspective, but, not only did you see it from an outside point of view, you experienced it. And, I am glad that you didn't have to grow up around that and feel, like an outcast. I'm glad that, like you said, your dad said, let's move to Florida.
Yeah, me too. I think also though it was his way of escaping because again, like I always say, he died when she died, and how could he not? I couldn't imagine.
Right.
But I think it was also he's very avoidant to this day even, so I'm sure there was a little bit of that in there.
Now, here's the question. Do you feel like the bullying subsided after you left Ohio and moved to Florida? Did it get better?
Absolutely. And I this sounds so warped to say, but like I was always a bigger person. Food was always my comfort. It was always a stagnant. I might not have known where I was going to be staying that evening because of all the chaos, but I knew I had money for dinner. So food was a huge part of comfort for me, and I was always a bigger person for that reason. And, there were some kids who bullied me for my weight, but outside of that, no, when you moved to Florida, it was kind of cool. Oh, your parent is in a same sex relationship. You're the cool kid, which I mean, granted, my dad's partners after that one was phenomenal, but it was such a crazy different experience.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad it got better for sure, because again, bullying is a form of trauma, right?
Yeah.
As mental health therapists, we most definitely hear a lot about that, from our clients. And so, amongst all the other things that you were dealing with, I'm glad that, that was something that subsided, you know. Now you moved to Florida at age 10, right?
It
Or
was, so I'm not gonna lie, that age is a little murky. It was either 10 or 11. It was around that time.
Gotcha. So tell us about life once you got to Florida.
Well, so my dad was actually setting up his business in Orlando, but at the time, we were really, really poor. His boyfriend up north, the really abusive one, he had decided to like stop paying the bills and didn't tell my dad. So my dad was dealing kind of with a bankruptcy. I remember him saying at one point we were living on like $10 a week for food. But he never really showed that, and I give my dad a lot of credit. As avoidant as he is, he really does try. But so I he was in Orlando building up his business, and I moved in with my godmother, who was in Tarpon Springs, which is about a 2-hour trip essentially from Orlando. So I lived with my godmother for maybe like 2 years, I want to say. It was kind of on and off. I was shuffled around a lot, I will be honest. There's a lot of shuffling. But I stayed with her. She lived right across the street from the middle school. So I remember waking up and having to walk to the middle school. But her and I definitely, I give her a lot of credit. She could have easily given up on me. She's a really, really wonderful woman. She stepped in, she kind of took over that motherly role in a way. She doesn't have her own kids, and she doesn't she has that maternal instinct, but it's different, I guess. I don't know. It was just a very unique growing up experience with her, because I think she also looked at me as an adult, because by that time I had kind of been an adult. So I was with her for, I believe, about 2 years. My dad bought a house and I moved back in with him. And, up until I moved back in with my dad when I was 15, I believe. Because when I was 16 is when I worked at that job with the coworker. Yes. So there's just a lot of shuffling. I think that's also kind of a big thing now that I deal with is, we in a way get addicted to chaos. And for a long time of my life, it was chaos. It was, again, I don't know where I'm staying tonight, but I have money for food. But wherever I end up, I end up. So I definitely, when things started to cool down in my life with more stability, I think is when I started acting out, and then I started hanging out with the older guys and the this and the that, and thus kind of led into the next part of, the losing of virginity, if that's what we want to call it.
Gotcha. And we also kind of talked about, I know after you moved to Florida, um, not that it's not that mental health wasn't significant for you before, but it sounds like, you were kind of telling me how it kind of hit a very difficult point, right? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. My mental health definitely was decreasing. It feels like by the day. I was 12 or 13, I was really, really bad with self harm. I was cutting, I was burning. I still have a scar. It was over my heart. I burned a heart into my chest, still there. I was just trying to do anything to feel alive. And I think self harm is one of those things. I often hear parents say, well, I don't get it. And that's fair, but be thankful for that. If your kid does get it, they're in that much pain that they're looking for that external kind of source to get rid of it. But I was a really bad cutter, and the whole thing that actually started my own mental health journey was I had gone to my primary care physician. Bless her heart. My dad, whenever he didn't know how to have an awkward conversation, he would drop me off at her and she would have it with me. So in this time, I was cutting a lot, and basically he asked her to have that conversation with me, and it kind of ended up like you either need to get her in therapy, get her help, or I'm gonna have to call DCF for neglect. But my dad, growing up Greek, the mental health wasn't a thing. You put your big boy pants on and you get through it. So that was kind of a whole new world for both of us. And actually, it was after that though that was my suicide attempt. I overdosed on my mental health medication, which joke was on me. They were the ones that if you just overdose, you get incredibly ill. So kind of a double whammy on that one, but thank gosh it was. Um, but so I tried that when nobody was home, and I slept for like a day or two after, and I felt like crap. And then I did kind of start having some issues with my kidney, and I'm not sure if that's from that or what. But then other time I had tried was, with the knife. I was already a cutter, so I don't know what my plan exactly was, but I figured that would be also a dramatic way to go, just for my angsty teen self to know that's how I was feeling. But I don't know. I have always struggled with a higher power, but something popped up that night and kept me here.
Man, well, I'm glad. I'm definitely glad, because all of the things that you went through, and we're not even finished, but all of these things, you know, pushed you to pursue your career, and you've been able to give back to others, in a huge way in your area. So that's amazing. Yes, there was most definitely a reason. So, I think this is, an important topic because number one, obviously there are women who can relate, as mental health professionals. We talk to clients all the time that, you know, had mental health, difficulties and struggles in their youth, right? Even adults, 40s, 50s, 60s, even 70-year-olds, that had a lot of this stuff going on, but didn't really have a place to turn or anybody to listen to them, right? I'm glad that you had, your dad, which he didn't know what to do, but he was like, let me take you to somebody that does, right? And, obviously, working with kids, you see that parents also, feel like, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do. Right. And, it's important that even if you don't know what to do, you find somebody that does.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So yeah, thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing that. That requires a ton of vulnerability. But I think is such an important topic, to talk about and for people to recognize. So tell us a little bit about um when you got your job.
Yeah. Do you mean the mental health job or?
No, at 16, sorry.
Oh, sorry, no, no, no. I thought so. I was like, wait a minute. So it was actually my second job. I worked at Panera for a whole 2 months, that was not a good job, I must say. They were very, very, I hate using the word toxic, but kind of toxic, but beside the point. So I started working at Winn Dixie, and I loved it. I really, honestly, like looking back, that's the job I had the most fun with. But there's always that older boy when you're a teenager, I think. He used to come and hang out at my register. He worked in the seafood department. And I was just, I hate to say it, I look back on my teens and there was just so much search for love or validation or just this to feel complete that never happened. I looked for it in a lot of men, and there's a lot of shame now for that, but I guess I can't blame my childhood self for trying to survive. So yeah, I started that job. He would come up from his department and flirt with me and flirt with me and flirt with me. We exchanged numbers. And then one night we were hanging out. We were on my driveway in my car. My dad was in the house with his partner. So it happened like in my car on the driveway at midnight. Um, there are definitely things nowadays that I have reactions to that I can't do. My boyfriend's incredibly understanding, but it takes you right back to those moments. And again, just the confusion and the guilt of it started consensually. What right do I have to say no once it started? But also, again, the real true logic side of my brain is like, girl, come on, you know that's not okay. But that war goes on and on and on. But basically after that, um, and I think this is another guilty part. I didn't know in my teenage head what had really just happened or anything until like years later. So I hung out with him again. You know, it was like once or twice more. And in hindsight, it's so easy for people to say, well, why would you do that? I don't know. It was trauma reaction. I don't know. Um, but like I said, he's actually, I think he's still in prison. He did a really, really long stint for raping, I think, a 12-year-old, which is just horrific and again, guilt ridden. But that kind of chaos really was another turning point. Because at work, he started telling everybody, like I said, I was a slut, I was a whore. And his cousin actually took a liking to me for some reason. And he would get my work schedule from the original person to kind of like stalk me. And it became this huge, really scary thing. There was one night I was walking out to my car from work and he'd gotten in the back seat of my car. And like, it was a really terrifying time frame. And I didn't tell my dad what was going on, but my dad's the kind of person where, like I said, he's like, well, just do it. Put your pants on and do it. But this time he could tell something was up. And I told him, I'm like, I really need to quit this job. He's like, okay, which was very strange for my dad. So I did end up quitting, and luckily, I mean, maybe not luckily, but that kind of all died down. But I did find myself afterwards, there were two friends about 6 months after that had happened that they did also take advantage of me. The one, I remember we were at his house and he had locked the door and I couldn't get out. And he like kept trying to barricade it, and that just, I don't know, it was really scary. He didn't ultimately end up being able to do anything, but there was that experience, and then just coercion that I think a lot of young girls face. But yeah, there was just a lot of themes of that, and it just got to a point of, oh, okay, so this is only what people want from me, which the rest of my teen years were quite spicy, full of that.
I mean, I feel like you hit the nail on the head when you talked about, that search for love and validation. I think that's a big piece, obviously, to your journey, but not only just your journey,
Yeah.
women's journeys, girl, like
Yeah.
that doesn't get easier until you actually decide to do something about it, right? There are so many women much older than us, you know, decades older than us, and even obviously some younger than us that are on that same search for love and validation. And until you realize that or gain that insight that that's what you're looking for, you find yourself in the same circle, and it almost kind of feels like you're trapped.
Absolutely. That's a great way of saying it. And I mean, the really crappy part is, I think just naturally because of what sex um pumps in our body, you do get that validation and love and support for a minute. And it kind of becomes like a high, but then you're searching for it all the time and you're getting yourself in trouble and you're exposing yourself to things, although it's out of trauma. I mean, you are getting exposed to these things, and it's a really, really vicious cycle.
Yeah, no, it most definitely is, right? Like, and unfortunately, no one talks to girls about this stuff. Like, it's crazy how we experience things, and we evolve. Some of us evolve and then some of us don't evolve, but nobody thinks to say, let me start teaching girls about this, right? Teaching girls how to find love and validation within themselves, teaching young women how to do that, right? College age girls, all these time periods where, we're so vulnerable to seeking, validation from others. And you really have to become intentional about learning how to validate yourself. But that's an entire process, which obviously you know, right?
Yes, it's not something that we're taught usually. There are the few that are lucky, but and I think just looking back at college, things that we thought were so funny because of developmentally where we are, now it's like, oof, like I remember there was this one girl, they nicknamed her the raccoon. And it was because, every Friday or Saturday she would get really, really under the influence and she would always wake up naked in a bush or something, and her makeup was always like around her eyes, so they called her a raccoon. And at the time when you're in college, you're like, haha, that's crazy. But as an adult, you're like, oh my god, what happened to this girl? Why? What is going on? How can we help her? And I have no idea where she ended up today or anything, but it we don't talk about those things, or we don't. The shame and the guilt keep people so far away, I think, from the truth at times.
Most definitely. Like, I, when you were kind of telling a part of your story where you were talking about like how that person found themselves in the back like, of your car, like I shrieked, like, oh my gosh, that is stuff that you see on TV and you don't think whatever happened to you. Like, that's what I think of something like that. But I know it happens all the time. Like, it wouldn't be on TV if it didn't happen, you know? So, man, I'm glad that you were able to, you know, not have to, not have that be an added layer of, anything to deal with.
Yeah, and I think you hit the head on the nail with that. I can't tell you how many times I told myself, well, that could never happen to me. A million times. And every time, Lord, have I been humbled, so I've learned to stop saying that. Like, I think the cherry on the top was the domestic violence. We were it's so easy to judge. Well, I would never find myself in that situation, or I would never allow that. That's not how that works. I used to be one of those girls, and then it happens. And then the shame and guilt is tripled.
You are right. Yeah, I've learned that too. Like, never say never because you will find yourself in that situation and feeling kind of crunchy. Like, I talked all that crap and then boom, here I am. So, listen, I feel you on that. Now, we also kind of talked about how, you got into your master's program in 2015. So, like, tell us a little bit about how you transitioned, from the working and finally decided to go back to school.
Yeah, so my school journey, I really didn't take a break until I was in my master's program where I had to take off time because of that relationship. I started college at 16 with the early college program. I actually got my associate's degree a week before I got my high school diploma, which I always think is funny because that's totally not legal, but that's how they
Yeah,
said it.
cool.
Yeah, it was so funny. So I went directly from my associate's degree. I started at Stetson undergrad for my bachelor's in 2013 to 2015. Then 2015, that next semester, I started my master's. And I was on track to graduate when I was like, oh my gosh, 24 with my master's, but I had to take a U-turn, 2 semesters off. But I just kind of barreled through. Eventually, I'm thinking about doing a PhD, but that is for when I am less poor.
You're so wonderful because when I finished my master's program, I was like, I don't want to go back to school ever again. I'm done. And
I
I
felt that for a minute.
have the same ability to like focus because when you like life, you have all those added responsibilities. It's completely different from when you're younger and you know
Yes.
have this to worry about, that to worry about, and you can really just focus on school being the deal. So essentially, while you were working these jobs, you were, going to school all along, just kind of working as a way to bring in some money. Okay.
Yeah, and I mean, nowadays my business partner always jokes at me because I'm always working. It's just, my dad, but that was my dad's work ethic. He had to buy my mom's medication and things, but working 17 hours out of your day was just normal, which was helpful for school, but not for actually like living life.
Right. So when you were in your master's program, you mentioned that you had to take a couple semesters off. Tell us a little bit about that. Why did that happen?
Oh, all right. So this is, I've been through some stuff, but this is, I think, like I said before, the most impactful. I was just getting out of a relationship with somebody, and again, searching for kind of that immediate validation. I just started talking to this guy off Tinder, which I know that story never usually ends well. Just kidding. But so we were just talking, and then he needed somewhere to stay because he got kicked out of his house, and that's kind of what started. I didn't know we were in a relationship, and then all of a sudden we were, and he's in my house, and I can't get rid of him. And I remember the very first, I guess, super duper red flag. So I was going to get a tattoo, and at this point, he'd been pretty, I guess, I don't want to say normal, but for lack of better words, normal. And I came home and he like berated me because I was like, he's like, how could you spend money on yourself but not me? And I was like, what? So I basically told him, like, get out. Well, a few hours later, apparently he was hiding around my porch and he came back into the house. And I mean, he just started berating me for hours upon hours upon hours. And that was the moment where everything kind of changed because I realized, like, he is not sane. And I mean, I'm sure there were red flags before that, but I just remember that was the first time I had to really like step back and be like, oh my God, what kind of situation am I into? And it just escalated from there. I mean, if I didn't answer my phone within 10 minutes, it was going to be a bad night. It got to the point where, so I ultimately ended up moving from that apartment into a different apartment. And my plan was to get him the hell away from me. Well, he followed, and there was so much fear. And I think that's what a lot of people don't understand about these relationships. The fear is so paralyzing. It drives everything. And I did let it happen to a degree, but also I was trying to survive. And I look at the charges that were brought up against him recently, and I know, had I been more assertive in things, that would have been me, which sucks. But also, I know I was just trying to survive. So things just kept escalating. There was a lot of threats, a lot of screaming, a lot of playing around that left bruises and things. When we moved, it was about a mile away from where I was working. We had to come up with a safety plan because during the days he would stalk me at work. He'd look through the windows of the building, see where I was. He always was afraid I was going to be having intercourse with a client. And I'm like, you obviously don't know me. I would never do that. I'm a therapist. Absolutely not. But he would peek through the windows, and obviously work kind of caught on to that. So, it was just embarrassing. Then we had a safety plan. And then I think the tipping point, though, was my grandfather, who was very close to. I had to go up north, and he ended up passing away. And I was just beyond devastated. There weren't even words. And I came back home, and I remember the first thing out of his mouth was, "How was your vacation?" And he just started on and on and on and on. And I was just so broken down. And again, it took me to that dark place of, at this point, I would rather die than have to deal with you for one more day. And it was probably a week after his death, and I'd been back home, and he had finally gotten a job, and he was bitching about it. And I was just like, I can't do this anymore. I just kind of whispered it, and he thought I was kidding. Well, I was not kidding. But I should say, prior to this, I did try to leave him one other time. It was around Easter, and he sliced all 4 of my tires. So I couldn't even go to Easter to see my dad, who was living on the other side of Florida, because I couldn't get there because my car was, yeah. So there's a lot of fear. And there's also a lot of fear. He's like, well, I won't just kill you. I'll kill your whole family, or I'll kill your family and make you live without them. And
So he
he,
literally threatened your life.
many, many, many times. And I mean, this sounds crazy, but do you ever just look at somebody in their eyes and you know what they're capable of? It was that. Like,
Yeah.
he had definitely, he used to always love to kind of play this around like, you don't know what I'm capable of. I've already, gotten rid of 3 people. You're going to be the 4th. And there's this case in Orlando. He was actually roommates with the guy who had killed this woman. The guy's name, for Orlando folks, you'll probably know, James Hadaway. He was a serial killer for women. But he and my ex had shared a jail cell, and they got to talking, and he claims that he had helped him on a few things or whatever. I don't know, but he loved to definitely remind me that my life was at risk of any point and I would easily become at the bottom of the lake. And it was terrifying. It was, but there, I got to that point where I just said, I don't give a shit. If you're going to do it, you're going to do it. And it kind of was my suicidal ideation or acceptance of it that got me out of the situation, which is just horrible. I don't want anybody to ever to get there, but that's what it took for me to break free. It was acceptance that I might die.
Wow. Oh my gosh. I mean, and obviously, from the therapist's point of view, our clients experience, domestic violence so much. This is, definitely a pattern, from what we see. And, from the outside point of view, we see how challenging it is. But, you had, points of view from both sides, which is a completely different point of view, than you get as a therapist.
Yeah, and I mean, I think on one end, it's not great, obviously, but it's great that I can relate to those who have experienced it because again, like you don't know until you know, and I don't ever want anybody to know. But I hate when people ask, "Well, why didn't you tell me?" or "Why didn't you leave sooner? You were the one making the money."
Yeah.
Well, okay, when I did kick him out, I dropped him off in Orlando. It was the most freeing moment of my life, and then I got a call a week later from one of his friends because his friends were having issues with him and they didn't trust him. And they're like, oh, yeah, by the way, he's talking about breaking into your house and I'm not really sure what else, but basically doing a home invasion. And just the fear that was so heightened. And then, of course, his friend did save me, but he did end up breaking into somebody else's house. And I'm not really sure what happened, but he did his plan on somebody else and he was in jail for that. And it's just like, that's why I think also it was so scary. Like he would say these things, and I know he was capable, and he would. The last night that he was in my house, I really thought I slept with a knife with my dog locked in our room because, the Daytona Police Beach Department were telling me, well, you can't kick him out. He's technically living there. He gets mail there. You're kind of shit out of luck. And also, we can't do anything. We can serve him, though, this piece of paper, but we see how well he is with abiding by pieces of paper. So,
Oh my gosh. Don't get me started on resources, for women that are in that situation. And I'm from Arkansas, and so, that's the conservative Bible Belt,
that's where
but
he's from. That's so interesting.
oh my gosh.
Interesting. Where at in Arkansas?
I'm from Little Rock.
He's from Benton.
Wow, that's really close to Little Rock. That's like a suburb of Little Rock.
Yeah.
You know, my understanding, when it comes to the domestic violence part and living with, I thought that if there was proven, and again, I'm sure this differs from state to state, if there was proven, domestic violence, you could either break a lease or ask the person to leave, or you had some sort of leeway, right?
Um, that may be true. All I know is whoever my dad and I talked to at the police department in Daytona were absolutely, they were like, yeah, no, until we can put him in jail,
Gosh,
you're kind of shit out of luck.
gosh, that's so unfortunate. That's so unfortunate. And such an important, thing for women to look into, especially if you're like listening to this or you're watching this, and you kind of relate to this story. Legislation and things have evolved, right? Um,
Yes.
so you said that you were 23 when this happened, right?
Yes, this was in 2018.
Okay, okay. So yeah, a few years ago, and I would hope that legislation has changed and, um, people have become more aware. Let's say that, right? Especially with our, law enforcement. I know they've been trying to make strides to become more aware, like putting social workers, you know, um, as a part of the police department in different task forces and things like, so hopefully if there's anyone that's listening, do some research on that and don't take the first person's word for it, because I think sometimes people just say things to get you out of their face, and because they don't know. And the reality is there's a lot of lazy people that won't look. They're not going to be an advocate for you. You have to really find someone that cares.
Yeah. No, I mean, you're absolutely right. Sometimes that's all it takes. Like, I ended up working with the police department a lot just through various jobs I've had. And, it's just like you have your amazing ones, then you have the ones that they do. They're like, okay, cool, get out of my face. And I think also, though, just laws around domestic violence are so gray on everything. And it's such an individualized, personal kind of situation. And I don't know. It's just there definitely needs to be something. What? I don't know. I don't have that answer. But telling somebody sorry until they beat the crap out of you and you end up in the hospital and we can't help you, that's not the answer.
No, absolutely not. So, gosh, um, this makes me, and obviously there's like national hotlines and all kinds of, other things. So I need to include that. I'm going to include that in the podcast, in YouTube notes below, like for anyone that is in need of that, even if you don't know what to do, calling that national number, they can probably tell you more about what the laws are in your, area, and point you to resources and things, to help you. Because, what I can recognize from the therapist point of view, even though I haven't been through that situation, is like you said, Alexis, you feel really stuck and you don't know where to turn. And, even just hearing you talk about that anxiety, right? That's what that is. It's like constant anxiety. And that, when you're fearing for your life, when you're wondering what's going to happen next, like like you said, I'm just trying to get day to day. I can't think about long term. I can't, think about trying to change laws and advocate and do all this stuff. Like I'm just trying to live for now.
Yeah, and I mean, it truly was. It was living by the second. Um, you know, I I was definitely just trying to survive. I'm not proud of this time, but I definitely had increased my use of substances. I was just trying to not deal with my reality at any point. And I think that's another thing when it comes to those kinds of relationships. Yes, obviously the goal is to get out of it, but it's really the bigger point is trying to survive through the day. Like, I think that's why it took me so long to, well, no, I mean, I was petrified, but to just hit that point, it was easier to deal with it than it was to try to get out of it because I know getting out of it was going to be exactly kind of what it was. And it was just exhausting, terrifying, and I really thought I was going to die.
I feel like a lot of people, whether you recognize that something is difficult or even dysfunctional, it's not easy to move out of it, because even though it's dysfunctional to others, it's your norm and it's
Yes.
where you found a sense of comfort, right? Even if it's not 100% comfort, right? But there's more comfort here than there is there with the that I need to make. Or, I feel like that can describe a lot of big changes that you have to make in your life, and why so many people find themselves staying, and not making changes.
I agree. No, I absolutely agree. And I can't bring it home enough that unless you're in that situation and you're constantly being fed, like, you're not worthy, I'm the best you'll ever get, I'm going to kill you, you don't know what it's like. It might not sound rational at points, but you hear it so much, it becomes your reality. Like, perfect example. The way my apartment was is so it was on the main road, and across the street was a bunch of woods. And, in hindsight, I can look at this and kind of laugh in a like really warped, kind of traumatic laugh kind of way. But he used to always tell me that he's going to go into those woods and just watch me, which he is fully capable of. And I know he did do a few times. But as time went on, I really found myself being so paranoid of these woods. And I remember people saying, well, do you really believe that? Yes, I absolutely fucking do. You don't know what he's capable of. I looked in his eyes while, he was holding a knife at me. Like, I know what he's capable of. Don't try to change that. And it's just, I don't know. It was just a really isolating experience because, you have everybody. You get isolated from all of your friends. You get isolated from your family members. They just think that you're being an asshole and not coming around anymore. And then you're just in this battle alone, which is exactly what they want. And it's so scary. And I thank God my friends are as amazing as they are, because they all came back and they were like, I'm so sorry. Let's never have it, always try to warn me, whatever. But I could see that not being the case for a lot of people. And it's a very scary situation. You don't know until you know.
Yeah, absolutely. And for you to still, be doing this, and I know, like you said, you had to take a break, from your grad program, but I mean, I feel like it speaks volumes, you didn't let that break become a lifetime break, right? It pushed you back 2 semesters, but you started, you continued again, that's the important piece. And, we have to, start helping people, understand the importance of resilience, and just understanding that as you go through things, and, maybe your story doesn't look quite like, Alexis's story, right? But resilience is really, sounds like what pushed you, toward, and it sounds like even through all the things that you went through, one of your family values was resilience and pushing forward. I heard you mention a couple of times.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's so interesting because, like, looking at that today, it's like, damn, you are powerful, but at the time you feel so broken. You forget how much power is in resilience and just the human spirit at all.
Man, but you did it. But you did it. And sometimes that's all we can say. But you did it.
Yeah,
Right? Like,
absolutely.
congratulations. I listen, I didn't know you, but just hearing what you were experiencing, what you've come from, that is a huge, you know, point of congratulations and milestone in your journey, and one of the many turning points, that got you to where you are today.
Absolutely.
So we've heard a lot about, what got you into this field. Um, what, you know, what encouraged you to start your practice? And like you said, you're the co-owner of the practice. So, this is different from just working at a practice, right? You're like running things. So tell us about that transition and journey.
Absolutely. So it's a really funny story. So I was working with my partner at a rehab, and she had already bought in the LLC and things years ago because she knew this is what she wanted. It just wasn't the right time. And transitioned to a different main job, but I still would see her and things. And we clicked so well. Like we are the yin and yang. Like we complement each other so well. I can't stress that enough. But one day she texts me and she's like, "Hey, I have a question. How do you feel about opening a private practice?" And I was like, "LOL, no." I told her absolutely not. And about a month later, she waited. She knew what she was doing. She waited, and I reached back out to her. I had a really bad day at work because at the time I was working at a methadone clinic, and our boss just does not care about client care or people at all. It was just horrible. And I texted her back and I was like, so tell me more. What are your thoughts about this? And within a few weeks later, we had it up and going. We actually launched it on her birthday, which was March 27th, 23rd, 27th, 27th of last year. Within 3 months, both of our caseloads were filled. Within 6 months, we'd hired our first worker. Within 10 months, we've hired 8 workers. And here we are a year and a half later. We just won our first grant. We are getting partnered with like nonprofits and things. It's really been an incredible journey. And not to toot my own horn, but it was from us doing the work, which is so crazy to see. Like I see a lot of therapists just have like a Psychology Today and a website, which is great, but you really got to do more than that. And we got really, really unconventional. Like we reached out to like tattoo parlors and to hairdressers, to other clinicians, to restaurants, and that's really where we've gotten most of our traction from, is from like those weird, not weird, but those unconventional places. Like even
Mm.
I left some cards at a restaurant and I had like 3 calls from there. It's so crazy how it happens.
Wow. Wow. I love that. I hear that. I hear, you being a go-getter, right? In every sense of the word. And you're like, I'm tired of this job, which happens a lot in our field. And it's typically those kind of work situations that are like the catalyst for you, like, you know what? I could make more money and have more freedom if I just did this. And you did it.
Yeah, and it's so funny. Well, it's not funny, but in 2021, I opened up a private practice by myself, and it just wasn't the right time. But I think I also used that failure as I'm either gonna do this whole ass or whole ass, so we're gonna do the thing. And we did. One of our offices is in DeLand, which was where we were both living at the time. We would go to the markets and pass out cards. We would go down the main street and bring Easter baskets to businesses. Like,
Yeah.
I personally, I love marketing. If I wasn't a therapist, I would love to be in marketing, but
I'll say you sound like you could be a good marketing coach. Like,
I had a lot of fun with it, And my partner, she always jokes at me because I always do like really bizarre things, but it's worked out. Like chiropractors are one of our biggest referral sources. Like who the heck would have thought? Not me.
who would have thought? All right, so if you're a therapist listening to this now, go out on the streets and go, oh my gosh. Wow. I feel like we could do a whole nother episode on, you building your private practice. I'm sure there's a lot of gems there.
Oh yeah, that's a whole story in itself. It's been a wild ride, but it's been the most wonderful ride. It's so different when something is yours.
It is much different. It is. Wow. I love this story. Um, I love how, like I said, how vulnerable you've been. And one of the things that I tell my clients, I tell them, I say 2 things. I say, number one, um, I'm a human.
Yes.
I have to remind them. And I'm like, please don't think because I'm sitting on this side that I don't have my own things that I'm going through, right? There's times when we're sitting at work and we're meeting with clients and we're still dealing with life. Like it does not stop.
All the time.
So there's, and I also tell them therapists need therapists because again, life doesn't stop.
It was so cute. I once had this client. She was like, I heard that you therapists have to have your own therapist. And I'm like, oh, yeah. She goes, really? I never would have guessed. I'm like, oh yeah, like that, they always say in our field, like what you're not dealing with will come up in sessions with clients. And boy, howdy does it. So I thought that was so cute. But yeah, I mean, and I think our practice tries to take that approach of like, we are just people too.
Yeah.
Relatable is the word I like to use.
Mhm.
Um, because I noticed for a lot of the people that are drawn to me, that little button up shirt therapist, with kind of the always right thing to say, it just doesn't work because I guess how do you take life things from a robot in a way?
Yeah. How do you relate?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Man. So for everyone, getting to this point, I just want to recap on some of the things we talked about because we've had an amazing conversation. And Alexis, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm kind of going on some of my notes that I was writing down.
Okay.
So Alexis shared her story, and she was just kind of sharing how, at age 7, her mom was diagnosed with, a terminal illness, and she, transitioned at age 9. She was very close with her mom, and after that, that impacted, she and her dad's, life overall. A lot of changes happened, and her dad explored his sexuality and ended up having, a male partner. This was challenging for, the environment that they were living in Ohio. And she experienced bullying. Um, soon after that, her dad made the decision to move to Florida, and where he started building his business. And when, she got down there, it was kind of, she was in transition, and there was a point in time in where she was left with, her dad's abusive partner. Um, and I remember you also saying that you would go back and forth with, was it your godmom?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Um, Kind of after that, around 12, 13 is, when mental health hit hard for Alexis. And that was the period in where she was like self harming and, even having suicidal ideation, and had even attempted suicide a couple of times, unsuccessful, which we're glad about. Um, that's kind of when, she was like, man, what's going on? Let me do something. And that was, a turning point for her. Um, she did amazingly well in school and graduated high school. Um, did you say, hold on, did you say a week? She graduated with her associates a week before she graduated with her high school degree. And so she was doing college courses the entire time, which is amazing, to graduate with an associate and a high school diploma at age 18. All the while she was working part time, and she had gotten into, a series of just difficult, and some abusive relationships, and experienced some sexual assault in between. Um, she went and did her master's, started her master's program in 2013, graduated in 2015.
That was
Uh,
my bachelor's. My master's started 2015.
oh, your bachelor's. Okay. Started the bachelor's in 2013 to 2015, and then started her master's in 2015. All the while, still lifing and going through, different, different relationships and navigating, one of which during her master's program actually cost. But resilience won, in this experience, and she did finish her program, and has now come to, be a co-owner for one of the largest private practices in her area.
Yes.
Oh,
Ah.
I know.
What a journey. That's what I could say.
What a journey. What a journey. Like all the way starting at age 7. So I love how we were able to follow you from 7 to, did you say you were 30 now?
Yeah, I just turned 30 in July.
Wow. So we just heard Alexis's story from age 7 all the way to 30. Like that's amazing. Like I enjoyed hearing this story. Like I said, it's amazing all of the things that you have come through. Um, and I love your resilience. I love how, you know, you can tell your story because for those who are listening, there's power in telling your story. And it also shows that you've come to a point in your healing because there are so many people that cannot talk about this story, you know, and Alexis does it so confidently. So that's how we know, right, that she's done that work, that needs to be done when you got all these things that you're dealing with. Alexis, I don't want to end this podcast without giving you the space and opportunity to tell people, like, if they wanted to, come to your practice, where do they find you? How do they get in contact? How do they become a client? Give them the details.
Absolutely. So the name of our practice is called Be Kind to Mind Counseling. We are predominantly in Volusia County, but we do telecounseling all across the state of Florida as well as Vermont, which is a very random state, but we got licensed there now. We do offer groups because therapy is expensive and also it can be a luxury. So group counseling was kind of our way to, because we are a business, unfortunately, to still kind of make a little bit of money, but also make it a lot more accessible to people. But as far as specializations, my partner specializes in accelerated resolution therapy. I specialize in brain spotting. We have a play therapist, a qualified supervisor, somebody who works with veterans, somebody who does couples, somebody who does chronic illness, somebody who does more of like the neuroscience, traumatic brain injury side of things. Um, Gosh, we try to have somebody for everything. And if we don't, we will find you somebody who does. That's another big thing. I can't tell you the amount of therapists myself has reached out to with no answer or no follow-up resources or just not knowing where the hell to go. So we definitely try to make sure we find you somebody if we can't help you. We do take insurances, which include Aetna, Cigna, United, Blue Cross Blue Shields, kind of the more main ones. We are not in network with Medicaid or Medicare. So that's usually where we do find people, those resources that do take that because it's so hard to find. But they always, so Medicaid creates the obstacles, but that's the point. But yeah, we just really try to do a lot of accessibility. And also my partner and I are now open to doing like public speaking, podcast, other things. Like tomorrow, I'm actually going to the local college and discussing kind of what this career is and all of the fun things that come with it.
So tell us your website, your social media. How can we find you up there?
Yes. Okay. So for our website, it's just Be Kind to Mind. Is it Be Kind to Mind Counseling or Be Kind to Mind? Hold on. Give me 1 second. I say it enough. BeKindToMind.com. All of our social media is going to be Kind to Mind Counseling. That's kind of the handle for everything. We update our blog weekly. It is awesome. We have so many topics for people to go through. Our social media, we definitely try to give tips, tricks, updates, all of the fun things. So we really pour a lot into our social media. So hopefully at least one person can get some help through that. We've had people reach out from our blogs, like it was so sweet. There was this dad who was looking for some help for his daughter, and he did not know anywhere where to start. He's like, I read your blog, so I think you guys know a little bit. So, and also we want people to have like resources and accessibility because it is so hard.
I love it. And I'm going to include those links down in the podcast and the YouTube notes. So if you want to, become a client, just follow up, read the blogs, or any of that, then you can check the show notes below and those links will be there for you. Man, I love this conversation. So before we end, I want to tell people a little bit about how I help too. Um, I'm a mental health therapist, but my focus is more so on the nonprofit side. And, one of my big things right now is the Fynergy membership. And so I'm really huge on women empowerment because just being a therapist, so many women, that we run across need, you know, a starting point for growth. I can't tell you, how I wanted to grow in areas and how I've seen clients who want to grow in some areas, but don't really know where to start. And so the Fynergy membership is a monthly membership. I just launched it a couple months ago, so it's pretty new, but it's packed with a lot of amazing things. It's comprised of 3 sections. So there's one part, and it's called Fynergy Connect. We do live member meetups via Zoom, so virtual. We have Wednesday evening Bible study. We have fitness meetups. We have a once a month book club. We have an entrepreneur support group. We're adding things, to the events. But all in all, just giving women a place to connect from the comfort of your home. You don't have to even look all cute to join. You just join. Um, Another thing that's big with the Fynergy membership is it's called Fynergy Grow, and it's our kind of personal development library with blog posts, podcast episodes, downloadable PDFs, or ebooks, and videos, kind of courses, all geared towards all these different areas, of personal development for women. So it's not just emotional health that matters. There's physical health, there's emotional health, there's financial well-being, there's spiritual development in your career, and if you are an entrepreneur. So we don't want to just improve one area. We want to improve all of them. We want to set goals and work towards those. And then last but not least, we have Fynergy Social, which is kind of our Facebook group without the Facebook. So it's not noisy, right? We don't have to deal with the algorithm. We don't have to see everything that's going on Facebook, all those ads and stuff. We just post in there. We encourage each other. We check in with each other. We ask questions. We have discussions. And so I'm going to also drop the link below. And because this is new, this is right now, I have it priced at $4.99 a month, and there's a 30-day free trial. And so I want it to be accessible for women because, whether it's therapy you pursue or community you pursue, the point of this podcast is to encourage women to seek out some kind of assistance or community or guidance, right? We can't do this alone. And so if you've learned anything, from even hearing Alexis's story, you just hear those different points and where she felt alone. And that is part of what motivated her to, get into the field and then also to give back through her practice. So that was a mouthful. But find that link below. Like I said, I'll also be dropping Alexis's links below too. Before we close out, Alexis, I want to give you the floor to see if there's anything else you want to say before we end.
Yeah, I guess really the biggest thing I want people to take away from my story is, dealing with mental health. It doesn't have to be the end of your life. It might feel very, very overwhelming and big at times, but we can learn how to harness our mental health and just thrive and be what we want and need to be It is hard. I'm not going to lie to anybody. It is very hard, but you are capable, and we just have to get you a therapist and those people around you that are able to raise you to do that. And on the other side of it, you don't have to be broken or whatever to go to therapy. Therapy, I see people for communication. It doesn't have to be this big fault. And I think people sometimes forget that. But therapists and therapy is for everybody, just to be your favorite version of yourself. And that's all I got.
I said yes at the end because that's a big point for me to become a better version of yourself, right? So even if you're not a therapy person, there's ways to get help, but it does help when you have someone who's trained in that area, obviously, to help you guide you, right? A therapist doesn't tell you what to do. The therapist helps you gain insight to, things that you aren't really understanding of, and understanding how those things impact you on a daily basis. And that knowledge is what we use, for the changes that we need to make.
Absolutely.
So, oh my gosh, I enjoyed this conversation wholeheartedly. I enjoyed you, Alexis, just like I have said a few times, just being so vulnerable, sharing your story, coming on here, being authentic. And from that, I can really tell that you have a passion for helping others.
Oh, I greatly appreciate that. And likewise, I can absolutely see yours as well. So I appreciate you and your time so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, if you have made it to this point in the video, I thank you as well for hopping on. And I hope that this has inspired you to take some sort of action, to grow to be the woman that you desire to be. So I will see you on the next episode. Like, comment, and subscribe for us. Bye, ladies.
Bye.